Easter is just 2 weeks away, that time in the year when we particularly remember the world-changing actions of Jesus as he died on a cross and 3 days later was restored to life. And even as we respond to a major global crisis, even as we adjust to life with major restrictions, even as we experience sickness and isolation, it is so important to do so recognizing who Jesus is, what he has done, and how he continues to work amongst us today. To help us do that, we're going to look at a story of what happened as Jesus was going to Jerusalem with the cross just ahead of him. A story of bringing sight to two blind men who so desperately needed it. I've worn glasses from a very early age, about 7 or 8, after I told my parents I was struggling to see what was written on the board in the classroom. And I know that if I try and do things without my glasses, I struggle in so many ways. Things are blurred. Things are out of focus. I can't read things unless they're very close. I would be a danger to myself and to others. It would impact my ability to do virtually everything I do. But that's a long way from being blind, of not being able to see anything, and not being able to recognize the faces of those important to you. And in the time of Jesus, without all the things that have been developed to help the blind, without a social care structure to fall back on when necessary, blind people would have been dependent on family and friends and would have often needed to beg to get money for what they needed to live on. A difficult, demoralizing existence, and one that Jesus engaged with powerfully on multiple occasions, such as in our story today. There are 3 groups involved in the story: the crowd, the blind men, and Jesus himself. But another group of people were also present, the disciples, and we read about them in verse 29, that they're there but they don't feature in the story. They were watching. So we'll try and look at the story from their perspective and see what they made of it all. And as we do so, we'll ask questions of us as we seek to follow Jesus today. In the story, the crowd tried to stop these men getting to Jesus. They did not want their time with Jesus to be interrupted. Maybe they didn't see the needs of these 2 men as important. We don't know what the disciples thought of the actions of the crowd, but we do know what they did. They did nothing. They stayed silent. They did not get involved. Wouldn't it have been wonderful if 1 or 2 of those disciples had gone up to Jesus and explained what was happening and asked him to stop and heal these blind men? Well, at the same time, some more of the disciples had gone over to the blind men and helped them up and guided them to Jesus with the hope and expectation that he would be able to heal them. I'm seeing reports from lots of places at the moment of people who have had no thought of God for years suddenly turning to church and engaging in online services, of wanting to be part of something. They're looking for hope. They're looking for comfort. They're afraid. And even as we work out how to respond ourselves, let's recognize that there are people around us who are looking for what we already have. And let's try to find ways of introducing them to Jesus. What could you do this week to reach out to someone and offer the comfort that only Jesus can provide? From their privileged position of being close to Jesus, the disciples would have been able to see and hear everything that went on. They would have heard how the blind men referred to Jesus as Lord, as the Son of David. In doing so, these men were recognizing the authority of Jesus, recognizing that he was able to help them, to have mercy on them. And maybe, as they heard those words shouted out to get the attention of Jesus, as they heard their faith-enabled request for Jesus to make them see, they would have been challenged about their own attitude towards Jesus. They'd travelled with him for a few years. They'd spent time with him. They'd shared meals together. They'd seen Jesus tired and in need of a break. Maybe they'd lost some of that realization of the uniqueness and significance of Jesus. Maybe they had forgotten their need of his help and blessing in their own lives. Maybe they'd become used to him. And the attitude, the words of these blind men would have reminded them all over again something of who Jesus was. Is this something that we need to be reminded of today, particularly in light of this current crisis? Let's remind ourselves of the supremacy and authority of Jesus, the reality that he is Lord, that whatever happens he is still supreme, that all authority is his. This does not necessarily mean that it will stop the spread of this virus and the impact it is having with a miraculous act, although we might. But it does mean that he is walking amongst us throughout this crisis, and his power is available to us to rest in and to take confidence in. Do we need to be reminded of the fact that we continue to need his mercy, his forgiveness, his blessing, and that we can only find that in him? Most of us are in isolation apart from occasional trips out where necessary. Some of us have to stay completely at home, and it is difficult to cope with that lack of social contact. But this isolation does not apply to Jesus. He still offers to be with us, to walk with us, to be to us what we need, to be the strength in our weakness, to be there when we find the current situation overwhelming. Sometimes we might, and that's okay. Let's recognise again the authority and compassion of Jesus, and let's be prepared to cry out to him for his help. As the disciples have observed Jesus, they would have seen once again how he was in total control of the situation, and that he chooses to focus on what's important to him and not be swayed by those around him. And as we see so often, the way in which Jesus engages with these men is wonderful, it's considerate. He would have recognised that they were blind, but he doesn't presume what they want him to do. He just asks them. It gives them an opportunity to explain what they're looking for, to recognise their need of him. And he does not in any way try to give them something they're not looking for. But when he hears what they want, he responds to their need, he comes alongside them, he touches their eyes, and they can see, and they join the crowd. As the journey to Jerusalem starts up again, after another demonstration of the mercy and power of Jesus, the disciples would have had something more to think about. They would have seen again that it is the agenda of Jesus that is important, not the crowd's agenda, not their own ideas, but what Jesus chooses to do. But they would have also seen that he was interruptible. He was on the way to Jerusalem where he would die on the cross to deal with the problem of sin. This was the reason he had come to earth. This would have been his focus. But even with that supremely important task ahead of him, he had time to stop, to engage sensitively and respectfully with two men, and to change their lives. And they would have seen how Jesus engaged with these men by understanding where they were at, by meeting them at that place, and then changing their lives. What challenge would they have taken away from this encounter? The importance of knowing what Jesus is about and what's important to him? The need to be prepared for interruption to happen in our planned agendas so that we can bless others? The importance of treating people with respect and finding out what they're looking for as opposed to starting with our own ideas of what they are seeking? What challenges are we going to take away from this story? Even as we're trying to cope with the implications of all that is going on around us and the way that's affecting us, are we seeking to stay close to Jesus and understand what's important to him at this time? Are we sensitive to the needs of others, and are we prepared for our agendas to be interrupted so we can help them, ensuring appropriate social distancing is in place? Are we going to treat people with respect, not assuming we know what they need, but taking the time to find out, and then to see how we can help? If the disciples were able to observe our actions this last week, would they have seen people behaving like the crowd? Would they have seen people behaving like the blind man? Would they have seen people behaving like Jesus? And what about the week ahead?